Hello, and welcome to the channel. Ben Souls, your ultimate destination for raw, emotional stories that grip the heart and never let go. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city, your country, anywhere. Write down in the comments. I'm excited to hear from you. And while you're at it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because here we bring you stories so powerful, so breathtaking, they'll stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Now, before we dive in, I want to take a moment to pray for you, wherever you are. May this story bring you wisdom, strength, and healing. May it remind you that no matter the storms you face, there's hope waiting on the other side. So settle in, get comfortable, because this story, it's one you won't forget. Richard Kingsley wasn't just any CEO. No, he was a force, a name that carried weight in every corner of the city. When Richard walked into a room, heads turned, not because he demanded attention, but because the world around him simply shifted. Skyscrapers bore his name, buildings that touched the sky, shining with glass and steel, towering over the city like monuments to his success. His company was one of the biggest in the world, a business empire that stretched beyond borders, bringing him fortune few could dream of. But it wasn't just about money or power for Richard, it was about control. Control over every deal, every conversation, every move in the game of life he played so masterfully. His sharp suits, his cold gaze, his precise words, they all formed the armor of a man who ruled with iron will. Yet, behind the polished suits and the empire of wealth, was a man imprisoned by a secret so deep, so private, that not even his closest confidants knew. Not his board members, not his trusted advisors, not even the people he called family. For 20 long years, Richard Kingsley had lived a lie. He was impotent, not just physically, but emotionally trapped in a prison of silence and shame. A condition no amount of money could fix, a wound hidden beneath layers of pride and power. He carried this secret like a shadow, always close, always haunting. Every handshake, every toast, every smile masked the truth nobody could see. Richard's impotence was more than a medical condition. It was a reminder, a silent echo of a heartbreak so profound it had broken him in ways no one else could understand. This wasn't just about failing as a man in the eyes of society. It was about losing hope to build a family, to leave behind something real, something lasting. He wanted a child. More than anything in the world, Richard longed for a child to carry his name, his legacy, to be the living proof that he wasn't broken, that despite all the battles, he had conquered life's cruelest fight. But nature had betrayed him. Day after day, year after year, Richard faced the cruel truth that he couldn't fulfill this most basic of human desires. And so, he built walls, walls of wealth, walls of power, walls of indifference. He filled his life with board meetings, contracts, endless negotiations, and luxury. Yet inside, the emptiness grew. Every night, behind the locked doors of his penthouse, Richard fought silent battles against his loneliness. No one knew about the nights he'd awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories and what-ifs. What if he could turn back time? What if he could still become a father? These thoughts haunted him like ghosts, whispering, tearing at his soul. Despite his empire, despite the millions and the influence, Richard was a man broken in silence. He was a man desperate for a second chance. The years passed. Richard's impotence remained his most guarded secret, a secret buried so deep even his closest allies had no inkling. He was a master of disguise. To the world, he was invincible, a man who had everything, a man who could bend reality to his will. But behind closed doors, his world was crumbling. Every successful deal reminded him of what he lacked. Every celebration felt hollow. Every legacy he tried to build felt incomplete. His heart ached in ways money couldn't heal, and the pressure mounted, not just from the public, but from within. The pressure to prove himself, to prove he was still whole, still worthy. Richard knew the truth. A man's legacy wasn't just about the wealth he amassed, or the companies he built. It was about the family he left behind. He watched as friends around him celebrated birthdays, marriages, children. He attended countless events where children laughed and played, their lives full of hope and promise. And yet, for Richard, it was different. The silence of his penthouse was deafening. The absence of a child's laughter was unbearable. Sometimes he would sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if anyone would ever see the man beneath the mask. He wondered if anyone would ever know the pain he carried. Richard's impotence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a wound carved by betrayal and loss. Years ago, before his empire rose to unimaginable heights, Richard had loved deeply. His first love, his wife, was everything to him. They were young, hopeful, ready to build a life together. But she betrayed him. The details were a blur. Whispers behind closed doors, rumors that cut like knives. Her betrayal shattered him. The heartbreak left a scar deeper than any wound, and it changed him forever. It left him unable to love, unable to trust. It left him impotent, not just in body, but in spirit. Richard buried himself in work, numbing the pain with success. He built his empire brick by brick, stone by stone, fueled by anger and determination. But beneath the surface, the hurt festered. It was a secret he vowed never to reveal. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want pity. He wanted control. Control over his life. Control over the narrative. So he hid his impotence beneath layers of steel. Yet somewhere deep inside, a spark remained. A small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to reclaim what was lost, a way to rewrite his story. This hope was fragile, but it was powerful. It pushed Richard to take risks no man in his position would dare. It pushed him to test the impossible, to defy nature and fate, to find a way to have a child. And so, Richard Kingsley, the man who owned skyscrapers and ruled boardrooms, found himself standing at a crossroads between power and vulnerability, between pride and desperation, between the empire he had built and the family he dreamed of. What happens next? How does a man with everything risk it all for a chance at what money cannot buy? This is the story of that journey. A story of secrets, tests, promises, and betrayal. A story that will keep you on the edge of your seat, because this is not just the story of a CEO, it's the story of a man fighting to reclaim his soul, a man who had built an empire from nothing, yet carried a secret so heavy it threatened to break him. And just when it seemed his world was sealed tight behind walls of power and silence, someone unexpected stepped into his life, someone who would change everything. She was not like anyone Richard had ever known. Sarah Ellis was everything Richard Kingsley was not. Young, vibrant, full of life and fire. But Sarah's path to Richard Kingsley was not one paved by privilege or luck. She had heard his name long before she ever dreamed of working for him. Whispers in coffee shops, headlines in the business section, stories of a man who ruled the city with a ruthless grace. For Sarah, Richard Kingsley was a symbol of success, of power, of everything she wanted but didn't yet have. Growing up in a broken home, Sarah had learned that life wouldn't hand her anything on a silver platter. Her childhood was marked by silence, hardship, and sacrifice. There were mornings when the cold kitchen floor was her only breakfast, and nights when the only warmth was the thin blanket she shared with her younger brother. But Sarah never allowed those struggles to define her. She was determined to rise, to break the cycle. When the opportunity came to apply for a position as a personal assistant at Kingsley Enterprises, Sarah didn't hesitate. She spent hours perfecting her resume, writing cover letters, practicing for the interview. She knew this job was more than just a paycheck. It was a chance, a rare one, to step into a world she had only glimpsed from afar. The day of the interview was cold and rainy, much like the day she would later be called into Richard's office. Sarah arrived early, nerves fluttering in her stomach like restless birds. The lobby of Kingsley Enterprises was vast and intimidating, filled with marble floors and polished steel. She waited patiently, clutching her folder, rehearsing her answers silently. When Richard Kingsley finally entered the room, Sarah was struck by his presence. He was everything the stories said, commanding, confident, and unyielding. But there was something beneath the surface, a shadow that no one else seemed to notice. Richard studied her carefully, his sharp eyes weighing her every move. He wasn't a man to be easily impressed, but Sarah's determination shone through. She answered every question honestly, with a quiet strength that surprised even herself. When the interview ended, Richard gave a rare nod of approval. "You'll start Monday," he said simply. Working for Richard was like stepping into a new world. At first, Sarah was overwhelmed by the pace and pressure. The constant flow of calls, meetings, and demands left little room for mistakes. But she adapted quickly. She learned to read Richard's moods before he spoke, to anticipate his needs, and to navigate the complex web of the corporate world. Slowly, she became indispensable. Her role was no longer just to organize his schedule, it was to be his confidant, his anchor in the chaos. But Richard saw something more in Sarah. She was a test, a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he had tried to bury. One rainy afternoon, everything changed. Richard called her into his office, the same way he had on that first day. The walls lined with expensive art seemed to close in as he looked at her with a vulnerability that stunned her. Then, in a voice low and trembling with raw honesty, he said, "Give me a baby, and I'll change your life forever." Sarah blinked. Her mind raced. Was this real? Was this some cruel joke? Or was it a desperate plea from a man broken beneath his power? The weight of those words settled heavy in the room. Sarah stood at a crossroads. Would she accept an offer that could change everything, or walk away and keep her own dreams alive? The rain outside matched the storm inside her heart. This was no ordinary choice. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. Richard's offer was unlike any Sarah had ever heard before. It wasn't wrapped in subtlety or softened by promises. It was direct, raw, and heavy with weight. "If you bear me a child," he said, his voice steady but lined with desperation, "I will change your life forever." A future of wealth, power, and influence lay on the table, as vast and bright as the city skyline outside his office window. A future few could even dream of, but with that promise came conditions that Sarah could not ignore. Beneath the surface of Richard's confident exterior was a secret, so dark it had shaped every choice he had ever made. His impotence wasn't just a physical condition, it was a symbol of a pain he carried deep inside, a secret that had been hidden for 20 long years. Sarah's mind swirled with the weight of the decision before her. Accept this deal, and she could live surrounded by luxury, with a child she might come to love, or one she might never truly connect with, but she would forever be tied to a man who had kept her in the dark, whose world was built on silence and secrets. Or she could walk away, leave behind the promise of power and the man who had silently tested her. The choice was crushing. Every moment, she felt the pull of ambition and the whisper of fear. Was she ready to accept such a life? With all its unknowns, could she trust a man whose past was clouded by betrayal and pain? Yet, deep inside, a small voice urged her on. This was her chance. A chance to rise, to rewrite her story, to claim a future she had fought so hard to dream of. And so, despite every doubt and every fear, Sarah chose to stay. She stepped into the unknown, trusting a man desperate to reclaim his legacy and haunted by his own demons. From that day, nothing would ever be the same. Her life became a delicate balance between hope and uncertainty, power and vulnerability. Every day was a test of her strength, her courage, and the fragile trust between them. And Richard, he was both the storm and the shelter, a man determined to build a legacy, even if it meant breaking down the walls he had spent decades erecting. Their journey had begun, filled with promise and peril, light and shadow. Neither could predict the trials that awaited, nor the secrets that would rise to the surface. But one thing was certain: their lives were forever intertwined, in ways neither could yet understand. Sarah stepped deeper into Richard's world, a world of power and secrets, luxury and shadows. Yet beneath the gleaming surface, she sensed there was more than just business and ambition at play. There was pain, old, heavy, and carefully hidden behind Richard's cold exterior. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that Richard's impotence was not simply a physical condition. It was a curse born from something far darker, far more painful, a wound carved deep into his soul. She learned that years ago, before the man she knew became the titan of industry, Richard had been a husband and a man full of hope. His first wife had been the light of his life. the woman he believed would stand by him forever. But she betrayed him in the cruelest way imaginable. The betrayal wasn't just an act of unfaithfulness. It was a devastation so deep, it broke Richard, not just emotionally, but physically. It shattered his heart, leaving scars no one could see. She left him with nothing but a shattered spirit, and a body that refused to answer the call of love. For 2 decades, Richard had hidden behind his empire of power, pride, building walls so high that no one could glimpse the broken man beneath. But Sarah was about to uncover the truth. As days turned into nights, she pieced together the fragments of Richard's past, the whispered conversations, the guarded moments, the rare flashes of pain in his eyes. She saw how the betrayal had changed him, how it had left a void he struggled to fill with money and control, and she understood why the promise he made to her was so desperate, so urgent. Richard wasn't just seeking a child, he was searching for redemption, a way to heal a wound that time alone couldn't mend. For Sarah, this revelation shifted everything. She was no longer just a participant in his test, she was a witness to his brokenness. And in that brokenness, she found a strange connection, a fragile thread of humanity between them. The secret behind the curtain was more than a medical truth. It was a story of loss, pain, and the long, difficult road to forgiveness. And Sarah knew that if they were to move forward, they would have to face those shadows together. Because healing, she realized, was not just about power or promises. It was about confronting the past, no matter how painful, and finding a way to build something new from the ruins. Their journey was no longer just about a future child or a changed life. It was about 2 broken souls trying to find hope in a world that had tried to break them both. The moment that changed everything came unexpected. One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and silence, Richard and Sarah found themselves alone in his office, a rare quiet moment away from the eyes and ears of the world. The weight of the secret Richard carried pressed heavily between them. The promise he had made to Sarah, a child, felt suddenly fragile, almost impossible. Sarah looked at him, searching his eyes, trying to understand the man beneath the power and pride. "I need to know," she said softly. "How can this work? You've told me about your condition, but how can we be sure a child will come from this?" Richard sighed, the walls he had built around his pain starting to crumble. "I don't know," he admitted. "Nature has failed me, but I'm willing to try anything." It was then that the idea of the test was born, not as a simple step, but as a necessary challenge to face the truth head-on. They turned to experts, doctors who could guide them through the possibilities science could offer. Since Richard's impotence was not natural, but a consequence of the deep wounds from his past, natural conception was impossible. The only way forward was through medical assistance, a test of hope, of trust, and of courage. Richard's sperm would be collected, and through a carefully timed procedure called intrauterine insemination, Sarah would be given the chance to carry his child. It was a path filled with uncertainty, risks, and raw emotion. But for both of them, it was the only way to bridge the chasm between what was lost and what they desperately wanted to build. Sarah faced the choice to accept this test, and all it meant, or to walk away and keep her dreams intact, but separate from Richard's shadow. Sarah knew that accepting the test meant more than just the medical procedures ahead. It meant entering into a partnership built on fragile hope and unspoken fears. It meant trusting a man who had hidden so much for so long. But it also meant claiming a future that had once seemed impossible. The day of the procedure arrived with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Sarah sat in the sterile hospital room, her heart pounding louder than the beeping machines around her. She was alone, but she felt the weight of Richard's presence just beyond the door, a presence filled with hope and desperation. The doctors worked with quiet professionalism, explaining each step, offering reassurances, yet the air remained thick with tension. As the insemination process began, Sarah closed her eyes, imagining the life growing inside her, a symbol of second chances and new beginnings. Weeks passed slowly. Sarah's body responded in ways she barely dared to hope for. A missed period here, a sudden wave of fatigue there. Each sign, small but significant, fed the fragile hope that had taken root in her heart. But even as the pregnancy blossomed, The storm outside their private world grew louder. Rumors swirled in the corridors of power. Questions whispered behind closed doors. Eyes watched their every move. The promise of a child was no longer just their secret. It was a secret that, if exposed, could topple empires and shatter lives. Sarah felt the pressure keenly. She was no longer just a woman carrying a child. She was the guardian of a fragile truth. Every day became a delicate balance between joy and fear, between hope and uncertainty. She watched Richard closely, saw the way he wielded his charm like armor, felt the sting of his rare but fierce anger, and witnessed the moments when vulnerability broke through his mask. The test was more than a medical procedure. It was a test of trust, of courage, of love tangled with doubt. Every heartbeat echoed with the question, could they survive the storm ahead? But then, the unthinkable happened. Weeks into Sarah's pregnancy, the fragile hope they had clung to began to unravel. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from the clinic. They needed to discuss her recent test results urgently. Alone in her quiet apartment, heart pounding wildly, she unfolded the envelope in her trembling hands. And there, in black and white, was the truth that shattered everything. The child growing inside her wasn't Richard's. How could this be? Sarah asked herself the question again and again. How could she carry a child that was not the result of the carefully planned insemination with Richard's sperm? The answer lay in a mistake, a devastating error during the medical procedure. During the insemination process, sperm samples were collected, carefully labeled, and prepared for implantation. But in the shadows of the sterile lab, a grave error occurred. Sarah's sample was accidentally inseminated with the sperm of another donor, a man unknown to both Richard and Sarah. This wasn't a secret kept from her. The doctors were honest when the truth came to light. But the damage was done. The child growing inside Sarah carried the DNA of a stranger. This revelation was more than a medical error. It was a blow that shattered every hope Richard had held on to. Every plan, every promise, now seemed fragile and broken. For Richard, this wasn't just a betrayal by the medical system, it was a personal betrayal. A cruel twist of fate that mocked his years of pain and silence. Sarah felt trapped between two worlds. She carried the child entrusted to her by fate and science, yet the father was not the man who had promised her everything. The questions that followed were painful and unrelenting. What would this mean for their fragile bond? How could Richard face a child that was not his own? Could Sarah find the strength to carry on? The truth that shattered hope was not born of deceit or malice. It was the tragic result of a mistake, one that no one could have foreseen, and yet, the consequences were real. Richard's empire, once so solid, began to tremble under the weight of the secret. The man who had built a world of power and control now found himself powerless against fate. Sarah's life was forever changed. She was no longer just a woman carrying a child. She was the keeper of a truth that could destroy or save them both. In the face of this shattering truth, their journey took a turn no one expected. Richard Kingsley, the titan of industry, the man whose name alone commanded respect and fear, began to unravel. The empire he had painstakingly built over decades, an empire forged with iron will and relentless ambition, started to crumble from within. The news of the child's true parentage was like a poison, seeping into every corner of his carefully guarded world. It spread through whispered rumors in boardrooms, sharp glances in corridors, and hushed conversations in luxury suites. Even the people he once trusted looked at him differently now, doubt and suspicion lurking behind their eyes. Richard's grip on power weakened. Deals once secured with a firm handshake were now questioned. Allies who once bowed to his command grew distant, calculating the cost of their loyalty. Enemies, sensing weakness, circled like vultures waiting to feast. But the greatest battle was the one raging inside Richard himself. Gone was the confident, unbreakable man who ruled the city with an iron fist. In his place stood a man broken by betrayal, haunted by secrets, and consumed by pain. The mask of invincibility slipped away, revealing the raw wounds beneath. Night after night, Richard sat alone in his penthouse, staring into the darkness. His empire was crumbling, his reputation tarnished, and his heart shattered. He wrestled with a storm of emotions, anger at the cruel twist of fate, grief for the life he thought he had, and crushing shame for the secrets he had kept. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself standing at a crossroads. The woman who had entered Richard's world full of hope now faced a harsh truth. She could continue to play the part assigned to her, living in the shadows of lies, carrying the weight of promises broken and secrets buried, or she could break free. But Sarah chose freedom. With every passing day, she grew stronger. The secret she carried no longer crushed her spirit. It ignited a fire within. She realized that the real test wasn't about bearing a child for Richard or securing a fortune. It was about taking back control of her life. No longer bound by Richard's shadow, Sarah began to reclaim her power. She stood tall, refusing to be a pawn in a game she never fully understood. She began to make decisions for herself, to define her own future. The unraveling of Richard's world was painful to witness. The man who once seemed unstoppable now faced his greatest challenge, not from rivals or markets, but from within his own heart. But for Sarah, this chaos was a turning point, a moment when she discovered clarity and strength in the midst of the storm. As Richard spiraled into darkness, Sarah stepped into the light. Her journey was no longer tied to promises or secrets. It was her own story now, a story of resilience, courage, and hope. In the heart of Richard's towering office, bathed in the cold light of the city skyline, Sarah stood facing Richard. The man before her was not the untouchable CEO she had once admired. He was a broken human, stripped of his armor, vulnerable and raw. Her voice was steady, filled with the strength forged through months of struggle and truth. "You hid your pain behind lies," she said softly, but firmly. "But I'm done living in your shadow." Richard looked at her, not as the powerful man who had ruled an empire, but as someone who had been lost in his own darkness for too long. His eyes held sorrow, regret, and a flicker of something new, hope. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then slowly, the walls Richard had built began to crumble. What happened next was neither simple nor easy. It was a confrontation of truths, of pain laid bare, words spoken that cut deep, yet opened doors. They spoke of the past, of betrayals and heartbreaks, of dreams shattered and hopes reborn. They confronted the lies that had kept them apart, and the fears that had held them prisoner. In that room, two broken souls reached for understanding. They found not just pain but the possibility of forgiveness, not just loss, but the seed of new beginning. The final showdown was not a battle of power or pride. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance to choose between destruction and healing, and in that choice, their lives changed forever. Richard stood at a crossroads, a moment where his future would be defined not by the empire he had built, but by the man he chose to become. He had two paths before him. One led deeper into despair, consumed by anger, loss, and regret. The other offered a chance at redemption, a difficult, uncertain road that demanded courage, honesty, and change. Sarah too was at a turning point. Her journey, once defined by promises and shadows, was now hers alone to shape. She chose to build a new life, on her terms, without the weight of promises broken or secrets kept. Together they faced the pregnancy with a mix of hope and caution. Sarah's body carried not just a child, but the fragile hope of a new beginning. The weeks stretched into months, each day bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Richard, once distant and haunted, began to change. He attended doctor's appointments by Sarah's side, his presence steadying her in moments of doubt and fear. The man who had once hidden behind walls of pride now showed vulnerability, listening, learning, and embracing the reality of fatherhood. Sarah's pregnancy was not without hardship. Morning sickness, fatigue, and the constant reminder of the secret they guarded took their toll. Yet, Sarah's spirit remained unbroken. She found strength in the tiny life growing inside her, in the hope that despite all the pain, something beautiful was possible. Friends and family, once kept at a distance, slowly came closer. They offered support and love, helping Sarah prepare for the new chapter ahead. As the months passed, the city buzzed with whispers, curiosity about the woman who dared to rewrite her story. But Sarah paid little mind. Her focus was on the future she was building, one step, one day at a time. Richard faced his own battles. The collapse of his empire had shaken him to his core. but the impending arrival of a child gave him a new reason to fight, not for power or wealth, but for legacy. He began to rebuild, not as the ruthless titan of industry, but as a man who understood the true meaning of legacy, one defined not by money, but by love, truth, and redemption. The day of the birth arrived with a mixture of joy and tension. Sarah was surrounded by a circle of care, doctors, nurses, and those she trusted most. Richard waited anxiously in the hospital room, pacing, praying, and hoping. Hours passed in a blur of contractions, tears, and determination. Finally, the moment came. A cry pierced the air. A new life had arrived. Their child was born healthy, a symbol of hope in the midst of turmoil. Sarah held the baby close, feeling a surge of love that washed away months of fear and pain. Richard, too, was transformed by the experience. As he looked at his child, he saw not just a son or daughter, but a chance to heal, to forgive himself, to move forward. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Richard navigated the complexities of parenthood. They faced challenges, doubts, and moments of fragility, but through it all they found strength in each other. Sarah's decision to build her life on her own terms became a beacon. She refused to be defined by past betrayals or broken promises. Richard, humbled and changed, embraced a new role. No longer just a CEO, he became a father, learning to love not through power, but through presence. Together, they began to write a new chapter, filled with forgiveness, growth, and hope. This teaches us that power and promises mean nothing without truth and trust. It reminds us that sometimes the hardest battles are fought, not with others, but within ourselves. Now I want to know, what would you do if you were Sarah? Could you forgive a man with so many secrets? Or would you walk away and write your own story? Comment below, and if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, stories that break the heart, then heal it. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep your hearts open.